How are you? How are you, Don?
I'm fine, thank you.
I'm calling in from the beautiful environments of the Whole Foods parking lot. So,
You're very close to where my brother lives.
is that right?
Yes, he's on off of Clark, 2 blocks south of Wrigley.
Ah, I'm a little further north of there in
Okay,
Edgewater,
okay.
but not too far.
I know they have a Whole Foods near them.
They do. That was my. I used to live very close to Wrigley Field on Waveland Avenue for a few years, and that was my local Whole Foods.
Morning,
John
Don.
McLeod, can I ask about the Kirkin of the tartan that was just a little bit discussed? When are you planning one?
It's August 17, Sunday. It's at Brownson Presbyterian Church in Southern Pines. 10
And
o'clock.
are
10
you
o'clock.
looking to have a certain number of people, or?
Well, we've the St. Andrews Society, we have 20 banners, so we need 20, as I put it, kilted warriors for the procession.
Thank you. Those are details I did not know about a Kirkin.
I think I've got 17 people lined up right now. We have a piper, Bill Cottle will be piping.
Have you tried to reach out to Wayne Jernigan?
I'm sorry,
Don, this is Randy again. Have you tried to reach out to Wayne Jernigan?
I have not.
Um,
So you have a kilt?
yes.
Okay, I've got his phone number.
Yeah, he's got a kilt.
Good morning, Don. It's Dennis.
Dennis Helling, how are you?
Oh, good. I do not have a kilt.
I can't see you like last time, but thanks for coming on.
Oh, okay. Well, I don't think I have anything turned off.
Well, it's something at the headquarters there.
Okay.
I don't see myself or anyone. So,
Yeah.
so Dennis and I go back a long way to about 1973, probably.
Oh, wow.
Yes.
I tried to get him to take a position at Duke Hospital.
Oh, wow.
Things didn't work out for him or me, so I wound up leaving, and Dennis went elsewhere.
It's just turned 10 o'clock. Don, I don't know whether you have offered Connie's apologies from north of the
Please go
Canadian-US border. Connie Connie Nestor Anderson, as she is now, offers her apologies. She's up at Highland Games in Canada, where there is very patchy Wi-Fi. So this morning she called and sent Don, Jack, and I a message explaining that she couldn't attend today, but asked us to offer her apologies. And we certainly do that. And as Connie would say at the beginning of the Scottish History Forum meetings, this History Forum is part of the Chicago Scots, which is also known as the Illinois St. Andrews Society, to give us our proper and official name. We own and operate a beautiful little retirement community called Caledonia Senior Living. And that's our principal charitable purpose. We are, in fact, the oldest 501c3 in Illinois, celebrating this year our 180th anniversary, and that makes us older than Texas. For any Texans on the line today, I apologize. But Don, I always enjoy your remarks and your view of the world, and I'm really interested in what you're going to talk to us about today, the Civil War in North Carolina during the American Revolution. Before we get to that, Connie would always ask me to give an update from Chicago Scots and Caledonia, and I certainly bring the best regards from the team, both in North Riverside and more broadly the Scottish community in Chicago. We're focused on having just had our annual 108th or 9th, I forget which, certainly more than 100 annual picnic for the community. We now move on to our golf tournament, which is a unique outing called the Kilted Classic. We encourage, if not, we don't mandate kilts, but we certainly encourage them. And I play on one hole all day long, and therefore get to meet all the golfers that are coming through, and they play against this Scotsman on a hole called Beat the Scotsman. But what they don't know is that hidden behind a tree in the woods beside the tee box, I have secreted a bagpiper, and in the back of their backswings, Scotland the Brave will come blasting out from behind the trees. So I have a little secret weapon hidden there. That's the Kilted Classic, and it's a great way to have fun, celebrate Scotland, and raise a bit of support for Caledonia. We are also, looking to St. Andrew's Day at the end of the year, and our 180th annual Feast of the Haggis, or Feast of St. Andrew. Our guest of honour this year is the Right Honourable Henry McLeod, the former First Minister of Scotland, who has a new role representing Alzheimer's Scotland. So there's a lot of crossover, and Henry has agreed to come and speak at a little symposium about brain health and how we can all keep dementia and Alzheimer's at bay as long as we can. So I commend all those activities to you and encourage you to join us if you're able. And now, Don, I'm going to turn things over to you, and look forward to hearing about your remarks about civil war in North Carolina during the American Revolution.
Okay, thank you, Gus. I wish I could see all the people on the show. I can't. I only see my own screen. But anyway, let's get started. Basically, there are three types of Scots in North Carolina. You've got a few lowlanders who immigrated with the English. Many of them came down from Virginia into the Carolinas. Many of them were merchants, farmers, and they were lowlanders. You had a much larger group of Ulster Scots, or Scots-Irish. We discussed this group in the last lecture I did. They started off as lowland Scots, immigrated to Northern Ireland. They were there about 100 years and decided to leave. They were treated very badly by the British Crown. The Presbyterian Church was suppressed. The Ulster Scots could not hold public office, and they really got fed up with the economic situation, and 250,000 went to largely into Pennsylvania, then later all over the country. And you had a group of about 20,000 Scottish Highlanders who came into North Carolina. They were Gaelic speakers, settled largely in the so-called Sandhills of North Carolina. When you look at these three groups together, the Lowlanders, Ulster Scots, and Highlanders, nearly 50% of the white population in North Carolina was of Scottish descent.
Wow.
1/3 of the population of North Carolina were African slaves or free men. There's some free blacks as well. So probably North Carolina had a larger percent of the population being of Scottish descent than any other state. Highland Scots were from Argyll and the Hebrides predominantly. Most of them only spoke Gaelic. A lot of them did not understand or speak English. They had experienced the power of the British Crown in 1715 and 1746 at the two so-called Jacobite rebellions, in which the British Crown won, of course. The clan system at this time, after 1746, was broken forever. The chiefs of the clans were off in Edinburgh or London, spending money, neglecting the tenants and the people on the on their lands. sheep were more profitable than people. People were forced off the land. Poverty and the highland clearances were occurring. The Highlanders who came into North Carolina, particularly after 1750, had to pledge allegiance to the British Crown. Oaths at that time meant something. People did not break oaths lightly. The Scottish immigrants had a history of martial activity. The British government had newly formed Highland regiments, which revived respect among the Highlanders for the British Crown. Most of the Highlanders were rural farmers and tradesmen in America. Through land grants and purchases, most of them wound up with 100 acres or more of wealth that they could scarcely have imagined ever in Scotland. The Ulster Scots were lowland Scots originally. In the 1600s, they made a big migration to Ulster, to Northern Ireland. About 100 years later, 250,000 immigrated, largely into Pennsylvania. Pennsylvania land was held by the Quakers and Germans and others, and the Ulster Scots quickly started moving down the Appalachian Mountains into Virginia, North Carolina, and South Carolina. And they poured over into Tennessee, Kentucky, really into the entire Southwest. They were Presbyterian, and they immigrated due to suppression by the British Crown. They were anti-English by the time they got to America. They were ripe for a revolution. There was a regulator rebellion in North Carolina. This is a bit confusing. The regulator rebellion were mostly people in the western part of the state, majority of them Scot-Irish, who wanted regulations. North Carolina had the most corrupt of the colonial governments. Tax collectors and sheriffs were ripping the people off, overcharging for marriage licenses, any piece of paper. And the regulator rebellion was really a rebellion of mostly rural people who wanted regulation, who wanted a competent government. 5% of the population, the eastern planters, big plantations, control the government. And the backcountry farmers were unfairly taxed. The planter elite discouraged new western counties being formed, and basically you're represented equally in the various counties. So the big counties had no more power than a small county. The regulators rebelled, sacked Hillsborough, which was the state capital at the time. Governor Tryon sent 1,000 troops. The regulators were really unorganized. They weren't prepared for battle. There was a quick battle. Regulators were dispersed. 6 were hanged. The remaining were pardoned, but they had to take an oath to allegiance to the British Crown. Many of these regulators later became patriots in the Revolution. Some were loyalists. This is the Tryon Palace. This is the palace Governor Tryon built and was taxing these regulators to pay for. It was an uproar. There was a battle of Alamance, between the regulators and the Tryon's militia. 6 regulators hanged. That was pretty much the end of it, although there was a lot of resentment. Once the revolution got underway, there were several designations. People who were for the revolution are referred to various ways in the literature as Whigs, Patriots, Americans, and depending who was writing, they would be called rebels. Those against the revolution were the Tories, Loyalists, and the British. So you counter all of these terms, and it gets a little confusing sometimes trying to sort out who is who. Particularly the term Whigs and Tories are old terms going back to England and Ireland. And they're easily confused in the American public. Demographics in North Carolina, 1776. Population about 300,000. Largest town was Wilmington, 1,200 people maybe. Cross Creek, which is now Fayetteville, had about 500 people. Other notable towns were Hillsborough, Salisbury. Charlotte was just beginning. Charlotte had maybe a couple hundred people, a couple of dozen houses, courthouse. In the eastern part of the state, primarily English descent people who had moved down from Virginia. Highland Scots were in the Sandhills. Ulster Scots or Scots-Irish were in pretty much the rest of the state. You had a Moravian community near Winston-Salem. You had a scatter of Germans in the Piedmont who had immigrated to North Carolina from Pennsylvania along with the Scots-Irish. You had small Swiss and Huguenot communities, particularly in the area of New Bern in the eastern part of the state. There was natural friction between the Highlanders and the English, language differences and religious differences as well. Take a look at the colonial militia in North Carolina, established in 1669, way back. There was a Tuscarora War, 1711, 1715. At that time, the population in North Carolina was about 4,000 people. North Carolina would have been lost badly to the Tuscarora, except South Carolina militia came in and saved the day. The Militia Act of 1715, all freemen between the ages of 16 to 60 were supposed to be in a militia, except for the worthies, the wealthy people. There was realignment in 1775 leading up to the Revolution. Captain of a militia, local militia, would determine if the militia was Whig or Tory. Could go either way. Company members could change sides. There were two militias, official militias in the state by 1776, the Patriot Whig state militia and the Loyalist or Tory Loyalist militia. So people had a choice of going either way. People would join one militia and change and would switch to another. It was a very confusing situation. A couple of geographic areas in the state where there was a lot of civil unrest and the Loyalist Tory frictions. One is in the Cape Fear River Basin. There are two rivers, the Hall River and up the top left, and the Deep River come together to form the Cape Fear River. Cape Fear flows on down all the way to Wilmington. There was a lot of hostility. This is an area encompassing most of the Highland Scots, for example, and you had a lot of the Scots-Irish up in the upper part of the river basin. Another river basin was the Yadkin PD Basin. It starts up in the mountains of North Carolina, comes down through Winston-Salem. And there was a South Yadkin and a regular Yadkin that come together, particularly in that area with a lot of activity, a lot of Loyalist activity. Down in the lower part of where the Uwharrie River comes into the Yadkin, the river is then called the PD River, all the way down into South Carolina to the coast. You've got a lumber river down the lower right part, and that lumber river goes right through the Highland Scots community. So there were a lot of friction, a lot of little battles and skirmishes between the Patriots and the Loyalists along the Lumber River. Battle of Moore's Creek. This was really the first battle of the Revolution in the South, and occurred February 27, 1776. Moore's Creek Bridge is about 18 miles from Wilmington. The loyalists who were who were gathering together, hoped to go down the Cape Fear and join the British forces in Wilmington. Brigadier General McDonald and Colonel McLeod were sent from New York to recruit Highlanders loyalists, and they were assisted by Ellen McDonald, who was Flora McDonald's husband, and Allen McLean. They hoped to recruit 5,000 Regulators and 1,000 Scots. Initially, about 3,500 Loyalists and Regulators came together. By the time they got to Cross Creek, which is Fayetteville, there were only about 1,500 left. By the time they got to the battle at Moore's Creek, there were about 800, mostly Highlanders, who showed up. There were disagreements between the Regulators and the Highlanders. The Regulators wanted to attack. The Highlanders were more cautious and were waiting for a better opportunity. It was a quick battle. General McDonald was ill, bedridden. Colonel Donald McLeod was in command. When they tried to cross the bridge at Moore's Creek, the boards had been removed, the girders greased, and it could barely, a few made it over. It was a very quick battle of only a few minutes. The state militias were well organized, entrenched. It was a cold, wet morning. Patriots were ready. Highlanders were really poorly armed, charged with broadswords, the first of them. This was the last charge of Scottish broadswords in the world. The Highlanders were quickly defeated. It was the end of royal authority in North Carolina. Many of the Scottish homes were pillaged by neighbors in the next year or two. Aftermath of Moore's Creek. Patriot state and county militias were enhanced. Many loyalists went to the British fleet in Wilmington. Governor Martin went into exile on the British ship Cruiser. Loyalists kind of hunkered down, tried to stay quiet. In April, 2 months later, the state passed the Halifax Resolves, declaring independence from Britain. There were 2,000 of the Continental troops and militia were placed in Wilmington. There were 40 British ships and 9 regiments in the Cape Fear. The British ransacked Brunswick, many plantations. British warships finally left. Governor Martin left for New York. He was the last royal governor. The state adopted a constitution and Bill of Rights. So North Carolina was free and independent. Flora McDonald played a role in the Loyalist activities. She had 2 miserable years in North Carolina. Flora was most famous woman in Great Britain and Europe. She had helped Charles Edward Stuart in the Jacobite Rebellion. She had helped him escape from British authorities. She was in prison, Tower of London. Was a very quick-witted, charming woman, extremely popular, and she and her family emigrated to North Carolina. Shortly after getting here and getting their plantation established, the Moore's Creek business broke out. Her plantation was ransacked. Allen, her husband, was captured at Moore's Creek in prison, sent to Philadelphia. Alexander McLeod was Flora's, had married Anne, Flora's daughter. Alexander was at Moore's Creek as well. He escaped, made his way to New York, and joined the British Army. His plantation was ransacked as well. So his family, Anne and her children, and Flora were really threatened. They were protected by Kenneth Black. Anne and Flora and the family eventually made their way to New York, to Nova Scotia. Flora MacDonald's buried at Kilmuir on the Isle of Skye. So this was a sad time, 2 miserable years for a very famous woman in North Carolina. Here are documented episodes of civil violence, loyalist patriot kind of violence in North Carolina. 17 incidences in 1776. Then things got very quiet for several years. No documented problems in 77, 3, and then 2, 1780, 18, and boom, really at the end of the war virtually is when the violence broke out. And that's when things really got nasty between the patriots and the loyalists. The interesting development, there were some free slaves, free blacks, and escaped slaves who got involved in the revolution. Here's one, Thomas Peters, fugitive slave in Wilmington, became a loyalist sergeant in New York. Left New York, went to Nova Scotia, England, and joined the Sierra Leone Company. So this was trying to establish a black colony of former American slaves in Africa. There's some interesting stories. He had a disappointing end, however. One of the first large engagements, this is June 1780, so this is after this quiet period. Charleston had surrendered to the British in May 1780. The British had got almost complete control of South Carolina, Georgia at that time. 2 British officers who had been local people in the Lincoln, North Carolina area, they left Charleston and raised 1,300 loyalists in the Lincoln area. This is in the Piedmont, middle part of the state. 1,300 loyalists. Patriot General Griffith Rutherford and Colonel Francis Locke had amassed 400 patriots. And Rutherford and Locke surprised the loyalists at the Battle of Ramseur's Mill. This was neighbor fighting neighbor, hand-to-hand fighting. The loyalists were routed, surprisingly, total of 70 killed and 200 wounded. So this is one of the first really loyalist patriot battles in the state. This inspired the Patriot victory later at Kings Mountain. Colson's Mill, this is on the PD River. This is a small battle, but it reflects many such occasions in the state. Loyalist Colonel Bryant had 800 men, and he was attempting to unite with Major MacArthur of the 71st Highlanders. Patriot Colonel William Lee Davidson learned of the attacked. Loyalists retreated, 3 killed, 5 wounded. Colonel Davidson was shot in the stomach, later recovered, was involved in many battles later on, although he eventually got killed. Colonel Bryant is of interest. He had joined a Patriot militia, got in a fight with the militia captain. They had a fist fight, and Bryant decided to join a loyalist, to create and form a loyalist militia, which he did. And later he was defeated at the Battle of Hanging Rock, was sentenced to death, but was pardoned in exchange for British officers. And Colonel Bryant's situation shows how whimsical things were. People switched sides. They would base it on whether they liked their neighbors or not, or liked the other people in the militia, or had some falling out and switched sides. It was a very fluid situation. Kings Mountain. We discussed Kings Mountain at the last lecture, but here's a good case of except for one person. These were Americans fighting Americans. The Loyalists were under Major Patrick Ferguson, the only British officer involved. About 1,000 militia, mostly from South Carolina. Patriots had about 950 so-called over-the-mountain men. These were people from western North Carolina, southwestern Virginia, what is now Tennessee, and partly from South Carolina. They had come over the mountains to engage Ferguson. Ferguson was en route to join Cornwallis, the British Army near Charlotte. The Loyalists took refuge on Kings Mountain. The Loyalists had 290 killed, 163 wounded, and 668 prisoners taken. Ferguson was killed. This was a great victory for the Patriots. They only had 28 killed, 62 wounded. This is the largest all-American fight, except for Ferguson. It was a key turning point in the Southern theater. Over-mountain men have been praised and glorified ever since then. There were several captains, colonels there in charge: Campbell, McDowell, Cleveland, and Sevier. But many of the places in Tennessee are now named for these people, since that part of North Carolina became Tennessee. Here's another interesting episode: the Haw River Piles Massacre. John Pyle was a physician. He had been he was an old regulator, and he had been at Moore's Creek as a loyalist. He had a cavalry of 400 loyalists, and he was attempting to rendezvous with the British cavalry under Bannister Tarleton. The British cavalry and the Light Horse Harry Lee American cavalry both had green jackets. Pyle mistook Light Horse Harry Lee for Tarleton. He rode up, shook his hand, and the great hiking party proceeded. Pyle had 90 of his loyalists killed, 250 wounded. Only one patriot was killed. Pyle was thoroughly embarrassed. This was right before the Battle of Guilford Courthouse. Pyle's troops could have made a big difference on the British side had they been organized and present at Guilford Courthouse. Pyle later was prosecuted as a loyalist, but he was pardoned because he had helped, as a surgeon, he had helped wounded on both sides and had been very kind to patriots who were wounded. Here's Tarleton. He was a dandy. So he was the counterpart to Light Horse Harry Lee under the American troops. He won big at Camden, lost at Cowpens, and was a real showboat. Guilford Courthouse. This is a regular battle. British technically won the battle, left the army, but they lost 25% of their soldiers. It was a 2-hour battle. Nathaniel Greene and the Americans retreated. Their army was intact, though. British lost 25% of its soldiers. Cornwallis did not pursue. Cornwallis basically headed for Wilmington at that point. Lord Cornwallis. After Camden, Cowpens, and Kings Mountain, they arrived in Charlotte. He attacked the little village of Charlotte unsuccessfully. And the expression, the hornet's nest, he or Tarleton is quoted as saying, "This was nothing but a hornet's nest." The Patriot militia and sharpshooters really played havoc on the British Army in and around Charlotte. Surrender at Yorktown. Cornwallis basically went to Wilmington, then later left for Virginia, siege at Yorktown, surrendered October 19. And what you'll notice is that this was not the end of the war in some of the incidents coming up later. There was one of the most famous and infamous of the loyalists was David Fanning. He was orphaned. He was excellent at breaking horses, rider. He got involved in South Carolina as an Indian trader at 96. The town of 96 got its name because of 96 miles to the first Cherokee villages. He was involved on both sides in South Carolina as patriot and loyalist. Get jailed many times, managed to escape or be paroled. He was a strategic thinker, intrepid. He was very brave. He had a good evaluation of people. He was a good leader. He was also violent and very vengeful. He moved to North Carolina to continue havoc there. His headquarters were at Cox Mill, near Ramseur, Asheboro area. And he was being hunted by the Patriot militias. Here's an episode. Kenneth Black was already mentioned. He gave safe harbor to Flora McDonald, Flora's daughter Anne McLeod, and their children after Battle of Moores Creek. Fanning spent the night with Black, and Black gave him one of his horses to exchange his horse for one of Fanning's lame horses. There was a Colonel Philip Alston of the local Patriot militia in the Southern Pinehurst, Aberdeen section of North Carolina. He knew that Alston knew that Black and Fanning were friends. Alston encountered Black, ran him down, shot him, wounded him, bashed his head in. This led to something called the Battle of the Horseshoe. Kenneth Black was a Scottish Highland immigrant from the Isle of Jura and had many friends and people who thought like him in terms of the revolution in the area. House in the Horseshoe. Alston's men. This is Alston's house, his home, and he had some of his local militia in the house. Fanning tracked him down, and there was a battle at the House of the Horseshoe. Alston had a home on 4,000 acres. There was a gun battle between the fences and through the windows of the house. Fanning spotted a wagon loaded with hay and positioned it to set it on fire and burn the house down. Alston's wife, Temperance, came to the porch, calmly negotiated with Fanning, who was impressed by her courage and agreed to withdraw. A few people were killed, but I've often thought it's too bad, as you'll later see with Alston and Fanning, it's too bad they didn't kill each other at this battle. It would save a lot of grief for a lot of people later on. Here's a case, and this illustrates too that there was no court system functioning, there was no legal system functioning, or judicial system in the state. This is a situation in a place called Stewart's Creek. Thomas Robson had 300 Patriot militia, and they were about to execute 2 loyalists. They were just going to shoot them. One of the loyalists offered a very long prayer, which gave Hector McNeil and his loyalists time to come up from the creek bottom and rout the Patriots. One executioner tried to shoot one of the prisoners, had a flash in the pan, prisoners escaped, 3 loyalists killed. There are a lot of people embarrassed. But this illustrates the episodic nature of the skirmishes that took place and the nature of justice. The militia were their own justice system. They decided what to do and did it. There were no judges involved or sheriffs or people like that. The militia had total power. Another Fanning episode. In the present town of Pittsburgh, Fanning with a 49 loyalists attacked and captured 53 patriots. The patriots were prominent state and local leaders. They were assembling at the courthouse in Pittsburgh. Several loyalists were to be hanged. So Fanning interrupted that. He paroled most of the patriots, but 14 were sent to Wilmington to be under British control, be under British capture. Piney Bottom Creek. There was a Colonel Thomas Wade and a Captain Culp were part of General Nathaniel Greene's army, and they were returning home with their militia to Anson and Richmond County, southern central part of the state. They camped at night at Piney Bottom. Piney Bottom is located where Fort Bragg is now located. John McLeod had a ferry, and he alerted the loyalists in the area. The Scottish Highlanders had been being their homes were being ransacked, and they were being threatened by the Patriot militia in the Fort Bragg area. The loyalists attacked, 6 patriots killed. A lad who was with Colonel Wade was run down and killed. And this set off some days later Colonel Wade's revenge. He got his Anson militia together, 100 dragoons, and came back to the area. And this is in the area of Pinehurst, Southern Pines, Aberdeen, south central part of the state. Went to Kenneth Clark's farm, found and killed Alexander McLeod, John Clark, Duncan Curry, and Daniel McMillan, Alan McSween, threatened to kill the young John McLeod, son of Alexander McLeod. They spared him. They burned several farms. Kenneth's house, Black's house was ransacked. And Flora McDonald and her daughters were on one of Black's farms, and they threatened her. And she kind of dropped the news to the militia that there was smallpox, that some of the members had smallpox. So that kind of backed off the militia, and they left Flora and her family alone. Battle of Elizabethtown. Elizabethtown is down on the Cape Fear, southern part of the state. Bladen County, where Elizabethtown is located, was firmly in the hands of the Loyalists. There were 300 Loyalists in town, in Elizabethtown, and they had many prisoners. David Fanning had warned Colonel Thomas Brown, not Brown, but Colonel Slingsby and David Godden, the colonels in charge of the lawyers. Fanning had warned them they had too many prisoners. They couldn't control them. The loyalists, here's the Cape Fear River in the background. The Patriots waded across the river at night, came up through the forest, and attacked the courthouse where the loyalist militia were. Many loyalists were driven into the ravine, killed. And this site is known now as the Tory Hole. Loyalist Hole in Bladen County was broken, and this was a key turning point for the Patriots in the Lower Cape Fear. McFall's Mill Battle, prominent loyalist center near Rayford. Colonel Fanning was on his way from Wilmington to Chatham County. And then this He encountered Wade's loyalist troops there. Fanning was brilliant, winning it easily. 19 killed, 54 captured. Patriots fled, many were paroled, 30 sent to Wilmington. Loyalists were now in control of several counties, Hope, Scotland, Richmond, Cumberland counties. Hillsborough. This is an interesting incident. Hillsborough was the state capital at the time. Fanning had 600 loyalists, including Highlanders under Colonels McNeil and McDougall. 30 loyalists were in jail in Hillsborough to be hanged the next day. In the early morning fog, Fanning came into Hillsborough in 3 columns. Complete surprise, great loyalist victory of the entire war. Greatest victory of the entire war, really. Hillsborough was the state capital. Governor Burke surrendered. Fanning gave him favorable terms, spared his life. Patriots lost 15 killed, 20 wounded, 200 captured. Many of the Highlanders got drunk that night and were in poor shape the next morning for travel. They captured Governor Burke, and the plan was to take him to Wilmington to turn him over to the British government. After leaving Hillsborough, Fanning's troops had headed west to catch the Wilmington Road, to catch the road to Wilmington at a place called Lindley's Mill. There was a battle. All of Fanning's troops, they had 300 under one of the, Hector McNeil had 300 Highlanders. And they were told that they were routed by the Loyalists. This is near Lindley's Mill, Cane Creek. This road is still there on the right. This is a Revolutionary Road. And the Loyalists were marching down this. The Patriots were camped on the hill to the right and ambushed the Loyalists. It was going very badly. Hector McNeil was killed. Fanning realized what was happening and flanked the Loyalists, the Patriot troops, broke the battle up. Fanning was wounded. So this was there were 70 people killed in the battle, 200 wounded, and most of the people were buried in a mass grave. Governor Burke and the prisoners had been secluded in a Quaker church nearby. So after this, Governor Burke and some of the prisoners were taken to Wilmington and maintained there. Another battle took place at Brown's Marsh in the southeastern part of the state. Basically, General Butler and the Patriots were trying to free Governor Burke, but the Loyalist militia interceded. After fierce fighting, Butler ordered a retreat. Colonel Mebane, who had rallied the troops at Lindley's Mill, tried to rally the Patriots, but it really didn't work. Brown's Marsh was the high point of Loyalist efforts in Bladen County. Raft Swamp. This was after the McFalls Mill and Lindley's Mill and the defeat at Elizabethtown. Patriots under General Rutherford had 1,400 at the battle. There was a united Loyalist militia, about 600 people under Hector McNeil, Archibald McDougall, and Duncan Ray. It was a running battle from Little Raft to Big Raft swamps. 16 loyalists killed, 50 wounded. Loyalists finally lost control in the southeastern part of North Carolina. Wilmington was occupied by the British. They only had 3,300 infantry and cavalry to secure Wilmington. General James Henry Craig, he had been at Bunker Hill, Ticonderoga, Quebec, and many other sites. He commissioned David Fanning as a lieutenant colonel. Fanning was very proud of that and paraded around all he could in his insignia. There were many skirmishes and activities in the Wilmington area, but they're too numerous really to go into. Let's look at Fanning. This was after Yorktown. The war, for all intents and purposes, was over, but not for Fanning. He was feared by all. He had a tactic of calling out despised people he didn't like, despised Whigs, and killing them. He would go up to someone's home. If the person was not at home, he would burn everything. If he called out this person he disliked, if the man came out, he would kill him, but he would spare the home, the barns, and leave the home for the wife and family. Number of people he did this: John Cox, William Jackson, John Lowe, John Harding, different ones. Fanning went on a rampage in the center part of the country, killing Colonel Andrew Balfour. Interesting, Balfour was a leading politician in the center part of the state. His brother in Charleston was a devoted loyalist. Balfour was a devoted patriot. Number of places, but this was a pattern for Fanning at nighttime, going into farms, going into people's homes, calling them out, murdering them, burning the farms, and this was absolute unnecessary. It was after Yorktown. Fate of David Fanning. He was in many skirmishes in South Carolina and North Carolina. He was captured 19 times, but always got a pardon or escaping. Got married near the end of the war. He was one of 3 loyalists that were sentenced to death at the end of the war. He fled to South Carolina, then to Florida, which was controlled by Spanish, relocated into New Brunswick, Canada, and became kind of a respectable citizen in ways. Was in the legislative assembly, became a church member. He was convicted of rape of a young girl. He was found guilty, allowed to go to Nova Scotia, died there in 1825. What is the aftermath of all this loyalist patriot business? 100,000 loyalists left the United States. Several thousand Scottish Highlanders left for Canada's Maritimes and contributed greatly to the country's future. All were welcomed and many received land grants. Some went to the West Indies in Scotland. Animosity between loyalists and patriot families continued until the Civil War. Thing is, this saga is almost forgotten now. A lot of the loyalists, their properties were taken by the state. Many of the loyalists tried to get, they called it a filing for a memorial. It was for funds to compensate for their lost properties and all. And some got something, and these memorials were filed with the British government. Some got some compensation for their losses, never full restitution, but some compensation. That was the case for Alexander McLeod, for example, and Alan MacDonald. They did get some compensation. But this whole saga is almost forgotten now. And it was a time when probably 20% of the population were loyalists. Many, probably that many or more, just tried to stay were neutral, did not take sides. So this whole saga is forgotten now, but it's still a lot of memory in a lot of families, particularly in the Carolinas. If you look at North Carolina today, these are all places named after patriots. Or in the case of Chatham, Pittsburgh, this was named after William Pitt of Great Britain, who was very sympathetic to the American cause. And Chatham County and Pittsburgh were named after a British person. All these other people were patriots. Places are named for patriots in the American Revolution. Not a single place is named for a loyalist. Okay, I appreciate your attention. I'd be happy to take any questions at this point.
So I think this is a fantastic presentation. My ancestors had plantations on tributaries of the PD River in Florence, South Carolina, and David Fanning actually ransacked their houses, burned the plantations, shot family members, and left them to die, which they actually did not, but they assumed after being shot so many times. So I've rarely seen a presentation where they discuss his role as comprehensively as you did. So I think that's terrific. My understanding is he was only one of possibly 5 people convicted of war crimes and not paroled as a loyalist at the end of the Revolutionary War after all the terrible deeds that he committed.
He was not pardoned. Samuel Bryan was pardoned. He was sentenced to death, but was pardoned. He was exchanged for other people. But I'm not aware that anyone was actually put to death, although some were given sentences of death.
Yeah, there was a movie called The Patriot that just had its 20th anniversary, where it was talking about, it was sort of a composite figure with Francis Marion and Dan Morgan and so on. But
right.
The thing that was surprising to me is that a lot of those things actually happened to my family that were depicted in there and to some of the churches that they belonged to. And it's interesting that there've been a lot of attempts to discredit it, but it seems like a lot of the situations with the loyalists and the patriots that happened, and a lot of times the patriots were meeting in some of the Presbyterian churches that were set up in particular by the Scots Irish in sort of a network, and they were systematically burned also as part of the campaign that Fanning and the loyalists had.
Yeah, who was speaking?
John Gregg.
Okay. Yeah, I think the movie The Patriot took a lot of liberty with historical facts, but things were brutal in South Carolina. They were just as bad in South Carolina as North Carolina. And Fanning was involved in South Carolina early in the difficulties.
Don, if you open the Zoom window back up, you'll be able to see all of us.
I'm trying to figure out how to do that.
Yeah, so if you exit out of the PowerPoint window, Zoom should be open.
Okay, I see the Zoom now.
Great. You see us?
No. I've not seen any people in the whole presentation.
If I speak now, Don, can you see me? This is Gus.
No, I don't see anyone.
Okay.
Are you still looking at PowerPoint?
I'm in the PowerPoint, yes.
Okay, so if you exit out of PowerPoint in the top right,
It's called stop sharing.
Right, yeah, he's not sharing anymore.
Do you have to go under view?
I don't know quite what to do. I can
John,
get
this is
about seeing people
I'm
though.
not sure you're missing much.
John. This is Catherine.
This
I-
is Dennis. I have a question for you. With you said that there remained after all this 20% loyalists, and so when the Civil War came along, what did the loyalists do?
Well, I used a 20% figure. That's really one I pulled out of the air. John Adams, President John Adams, he claimed it was 1/3 loyalists, 1/3 patriots, and 1/3 don't cares or leave me alone.
Mm-hmm.
But again, he pulled that figure out of there. It was too convenient, I think. But I think a lot of people just wanted to stay out of it, be left alone. For example, when you look at the people involved, you see a lot of the Scots-Irish, the Highlanders who were involved. You don't see hardly any German names in North Carolina. And naturally, you don't see Quakers and the Moravians because they were pacifists. But you don't see any, there were a lot of Germans in the center B-Bunt part of the area who had immigrated along with the Scots-Irish from Pennsylvania. But you don't see any German names, hardly any at all. And
So in the
I
Civil
think
War,
they were convenient to farm and stay out of it.
yeah. Remind us again in terms of the sides that North Carolina and South Carolina fought on in the Civil War.
Well, South Carolina started the whole thing.
Yeah.
They were the first to succeed. They were hot to trot. They were. North Carolina was quite neutral. It was one of the last states to secede, and there were a lot of particularly the western part of the state, was not for the war. There were not that many slaves in the western part of the state, and that was a planter war.
Mm-hmm.
And, so there were a lot of people not really for the Civil War, particularly North Carolina, but everybody wound up supporting it. But there were a lot of people in the mountains in parts of the state who basically laid out, who hid out, who did not participate in the Civil War.
One of your earlier slides, you mentioned some of the historically well-known outdoorsmen, the mountain men, that played such an important role. What were some of those names again? Was that Davy Crockett?
Yeah, these were Scots-Irish people. The Scots-Irish, I mean, they basically led the Western movement. People like Crockett, Jim Boy, Sam Houston. When you go to the Battle of the Alamo, they were mostly Scots-Irish, a few Scots and Scots-Irish people at that battle on the American side.
Oh.
One of them was James Fannin, who was a descendant of Edmund Fanning.
Repeat that, please.
One of the heroes of the Alamo was James Fannin, who was a descendant of Edmund Fanning. He was actually the brother of Edmund Fanning, and dropped the G from his name so that he wouldn't be associated with Edmund Fanning.
Yeah, the Edmund Fanning was different than
David Fanning. Yes, yeah.
He was one of the people the regulators hated.
Right.
He was an official accused of embezzling money, overcharging for services, and he was one of the targets of the regulators.
Catherine, you had a question earlier.
Oh, yes, I just wanted to say thank you for highlighting this part of the Revolutionary War. We often think that all the fighting ended in 1776, and it didn't. So it's really nice to hear about these later battles, and that the war really did go on until into the 1780s.
You mentioned at the beginning that about half the white population was Scottish. Did they particularly situate one way or another along the question of slavery? Their economics seem to suggest to me that they would have been probably more likely against slavery. That the
Well,
English, with their large plantations, may have seen it as part of their economic survival, whereas the Scots may have been a bit less so inclined towards it.
well, if you take the Sandhills, for example, where the Highland Scots settled, there were some people who were not for slavery, but many of those farmers had slaves. One plantation owner near Southern Pines, I think he had about 100 slaves. So the Scots Irish, if you go over in the middle part of the state, all of those Presbyterian churches had balconies for slaves in those old churches that still exist. I think the number of slaves was much less among the Scots Irish. They tended to have 2, 3, 4, 5 slaves if they had slaves. Whereas some of there's a guy named Cameron in the Raleigh area. He had 1,000 slaves. Cameron Village, a big development in Raleigh, was named for him. He had 1,000 slaves. I had 3 great grandfathers in the Civil War on the southern side. None of them owned slaves. They were no slaves. They were small farmers. They were small guys doing the fighting for the planters. None of them owned slaves. So it was a mixed bag. It wasn't so much a moral thing as some people just didn't have slaves. They were yeoman farmers.
Don, where's your lineage from in North Carolina?
Well, the McLeods were Highland Scots from Isle of Skye. I've got 2 or 3 other Highland Scot lineages as well. McKay, McInnes, McIntyre, and then particularly on my mother's side, there were 2 people named Warner, who were in the American Revolution on the Continental Line. John Warner and his son Hardin Warner. They were English. They were from England, and they fought in the Revolution.
And you grew up in the Raleigh area?
What about the Raleigh area?
Did you grow up in the Raleigh area?
Not really. I grew up in a place called Richmond County, a small farming town of 100 people, peach orchards, lumber mill, in the Sandhills, in the sort of the Highland Scot settlement.
Any other questions for Don or comments that we want to make today?
Well, what was the relation between in general, between the Highlanders and the Ulster Scots? Because both were Presbyterian, right? Did they intermarry or interact much, or was it because they were from different areas?
That's a good question. The Scots Irish originally were Lowland Scots. They were Presbyterian predominantly, as were their Highlanders. But the Highlanders and the Lowland Scots are like two different countries. The Highlanders are Gaelic speakers. Originally, they were Irish. About the year 500, 600, there was a large invasion of Irish into what is the Highlands of Scotland. They brought the Irish Gaelic language over, which evolved over 1,500 years to Scottish Gaelic. They were very different. They were like a different country compared to the lowland of Scotland. So when those Highlanders and Scots-Irish got into North Carolina, they really had no particular affiliation for each other, except maybe the Presbyterian Church was the main crossover tie. They were like people from two different countries.
And the Scots-Irish were the ones who identified more with the Patriot cause, and I guess some of the Highlanders were mixed, being more predominantly associated with the Loyalist.
That's true. But one important fact, if you take the Battle of Moores Creek, originally they thought they had about 1,500 Highlanders to participate. Many of them dropped out. Only 800 made it to Moores Creek. But if you look at the Highland Scot population, by the time the Revolution started, there were about 20,000 who immigrated. There were probably 30,000 or more Highland Scot descendants. And if you look at how many of those would have been of military age, probably 6,000 or 7,000 would have been of the age, would have been male and of the age for military. At the most, 1,500 of them showed up, and most of them dropped out and went home before Moores Creek. So there were many Highlanders who did not get into the war. But some did, and some Highlands, Scots-Irish were loyalists as well, like that Battle of Ramseur's Mill. These two natives of Lincolnton area who had joined the British Army, they came and rounded up more than 1,000 loyalists in a quick period of time. And this was mostly a Scots-Irish community there. So the Scots-Irish went both ways in the Revolution. But on the whole, they were patriots. It was a confusing time, very confusing time.
Thank you.
Don, if there are no further questions from the group, let me, on everyone's behalf, please thank you for another wonderful presentation. Your lectures and your thoughts are always insightful. I really appreciate your time and your views, Don. Thank you very much.
I'm sorry, Connie was not along today.
Yeah, Connie was unfortunately not able to make it, but I know she'll look forward to seeing everyone next month. And until then, I have one more thing to recommend to everyone. If you have not heard or listened to a podcast called The Rest is History, there is just completed this week a 6-hour series on Mary, Queen of Scots, which I've thoroughly enjoyed. If you Google The Rest is History and go onto your podcast platforms, there's a 6-hour series on Mary, Queen of Scots. I'm sure you'll enjoy it. And until then, Jack, do you happen to know who is our speaker next month?
That actually would be me, Gus. There's Bob McLeod here.
Oh, fantastic, Bob.
And I'm gonna follow up with my good friend Don McLeod there about our organization, which is trying to commemorate and educate the people of North Carolina about the importance of the Scots immigrants, the Ulster Scots, as well as the Highland Scots in North Carolina. So
I'll be talking about that. And the monument we have just completed at the mouth of the Cape Fear River, where all these Scots arrived, starting in 1739. And the Ulster Scots that came down the Great Wagon Road from Philadelphia, and how we're trying to commemorate these journeys.
Well, I really look forward to that. It would be great to build on the wonderful presentation we had today, to hear more about the contemporary work that's happening. And thank you for doing it. Always great to hear your voice and now see your face, Bob. Greetings from a toasty Chicago. We've had some hot weather this week.
Thank you.
Well, Gus, it's actually, I think, cooler here than it is there. I think we're in the 70s here, so we're having a nice preview of fall, which is certainly welcome. And good seeing you again after all these years. Take care.
Yeah, but you look well. Thanks to everyone. We'll see you next month. Bob, look forward to your remarks.
Goodbye.
Thank you, Don. Appreciate it very much.
Thank you. Goodbye.
Don, before you go.
Yes.
Don, it's Catherine.
Yes.
Just as you finished talking about Kenneth Black, my phone rang. It was Scott Cromarty, who's a descendant of Kenneth Black.
Oh, is that right? Okay.
Yeah. Yeah. Funny coincidence.
His family cemetery has been nicely restored.
Yeah.
Here.
But funny coincidence that he would call just as you finished talking about his ancestor.
Yes, yes.
Thanks, everyone.
Right. See you well.
Be well. Bye.
Goodbye.
Don, you're going to reach out to Wayne Jernigan? Don, you're going to reach out to Wayne Jernigan about the kirking?
I will, yes.
Okay.
I've got a few calls to make tonight, and I'm pretty sure he's on the St. Andrews website.
Yeah.
The address it.
Yep.
Okay, thank you.
Great.